They called him dangerous, untrainable, a monster dog. Shackled at the far end of the auction pen, the massive German Shepherd growled at everyone who came near. But when a little boy stepped forward and placed his hand on the dog's forehead, what happened next stunned the entire crowd. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Alright, let's get started. The air inside the livestock auction was thick with dust and noise. At the farthest corner, away from the bustle, was a pen that drew more sideways glances than bids. Inside stood a massive German Shepherd, his thick coat dulled by neglect, muscles tense beneath the grime. A chain clinked softly every time he shifted his weight, the only sound he made. People walked past in pairs, whispering as they stole quick glances. "That's the one they call the monster," a man muttered to his wife. "Bit 2 handlers last month." Others didn't even look, just gave the pen a wide berth. The dog's amber eyes scanned the crowd, cold and unreadable. When someone came too close, his lips curled just enough to flash the sharp glint of teeth. No one lingered. No one dared. To everyone here, he wasn't a pet. He was trouble waiting to happen. The auctioneer's voice carried over the hum of the crowd, but it softened when he reached the shepherd's pen. "Lot number 84, he announced, glancing at the dog with a mixture of caution and pity. "Male, 4 years old, strong, but unpredictable. Handle with care." A few buyers chuckled under their breath, but most stayed silent. Everyone had heard the stories. Some claimed he'd been abandoned after turning on his owner. Others swore he'd been used in illegal fights, trained to attack on command. One handler whispered about the day he tried to muzzle him. The dog had lunged so fast it tore the leather strap in half. Whether the rumors were true or not didn't matter. The name "Monster Dog" had stuck. He'd been passed from hand to hand, each owner giving up faster than the last, until he ended up here, tied to a chain in a dusty pen. As people walked by, the shepherd stood rigid, tail low, but eyes alert, tracking every movement. His reputation had become a barrier thicker than the metal bars that confined him. No one imagined that behind those weary eyes was a story no one had taken the time to hear. The afternoon crowd had thinned when a man and his young son stepped through the auction gate. The boy couldn't have been more than 6, his small hand gripping his father's as they weaved through the rows of pens. They weren't here for dogs. The father had promised his son they'd look at ponies and maybe some goats. But halfway down the aisle, the boy stopped. His eyes locked on the far corner where the German Shepherd stood like a statue. The din of the auction seemed to fade as he stared, curiosity flickering across his face. "Come on, buddy," his father urged, giving his hand a gentle tug. "That one's not for us." The boy didn't move. "Why is he all alone?" he asked, his voice small but steady. "Because he's dangerous," the father replied, glancing toward the pen. "We don't go near dogs like that." But the boy wasn't listening anymore. Something in the shepherd's stillness drew him forward, step by slow step, as if an invisible thread connected them. The father sighed, unaware that each step his son took was pulling them closer to a moment that would silence the entire auction yard. The boy slipped from his father's grasp, his small boots kicking up puffs of dust as he crossed the auction yard. Heads turned, murmurs rippled through the crowd as people realized where he was headed. "Kid, get back here," someone shouted. The German Shepherd noticed him instantly. His ears shot forward, muscles tightening like coiled springs. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, vibrating through the metal rails. His amber eyes locked on the boy with an intensity that made onlookers uneasy. The boy stopped just a few feet from the pen. Dust swirled between them, catching the sunlight. He didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, he tilted his head, studying the dog as if trying to understand him. "Get away from there," the auctioneer barked, moving toward him. The father's voice rang out in panic, but the boy didn't seem to hear. The dog's lips curled, revealing teeth. His tail was rigid, his stance defensive. One wrong move and he could lunge. The crowd collectively held its breath. Then slowly, deliberately, the boy lifted his hand toward the dog's head. It was the kind of moment where time itself seemed to pause, balanced on a knife's edge between danger and something else entirely. The boy's small hand reached through the gap in the rails, palm open, fingers trembling just slightly in the warm air. The shepherd's growl deepened for a heartbeat, and the crowd braced for the inevitable snap. But it never came. Instead, the massive dog froze. His eyes narrowed, not in aggression, but in uncertainty. The growl faded to a low hum, and his head tilted ever so slightly as if trying to make sense of this fearless child standing before him. The boy's palm touched the center of the dog's forehead. For a split second, the shepherd remained rigid, every muscle locked. Then, like a tide receding, the tension began to drain from his body. His ears softened. His tail, once stiff, gave the faintest, hesitant wag. A small whimper escaped his throat, almost questioning. Gasps rose from the onlookers. The auctioneer stopped in his tracks, eyes wide. Even the boy's father stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. The boy smiled gently. "You're not a monster," he whispered, his voice just loud enough for the dog to hear. And in that instant, the German shepherd lowered his head and pressed his forehead firmly into the boy's hand as though he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The boy's fingers moved slowly, stroking the rough fur along the shepherd's head. Each pass of his small hand seemed to chip away at an invisible wall that had surrounded the dog for years. The growl was gone now, replaced by a low, rhythmic rumble, not of anger, but of contentment. The dog leaned closer, his heavy frame pressing against the rails as though trying to close the distance between them. His eyes, once sharp and guarded, now shimmered with something softer, something almost vulnerable. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "I've never seen him like this," one handler murmured. Another shook his head in disbelief. "That dog's drawn blood from grown men. Now look at him." The boy knelt, still speaking in that calm, steady tone, telling the dog things only they would ever understand. The shepherd responded by resting his head against the child's shoulder, eyes closing for the first time in what felt like forever. The auctioneer, normally quick to keep the show moving, simply stood still, his gavel hanging loosely at his side. This wasn't an animal sale anymore. It was something far bigger. In that crowded, dusty yard, a bond had been forged, unshakable and undeniable, witnessed by every stunned soul who happened to be there. The boy's father finally stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "We can't just leave him here." The auctioneer blinked as if snapping out of a trance. "You know his reputation. Owning him won't be easy." The father glanced at his son who was still kneeling beside the dog, and then at the shepherd who now looked up with quiet, pleading eyes. "I think he's already chosen us," he said. When the bidding began, only one hand went up, the father's. The crowd watched in silence as the gavel came down. "Sold." The boy grinned, hugging the dog's neck. And for the first time in years, the so-called monster wagged his tail without fear. The ride home was quiet. The shepherd curled at the boy's feet in the back seat, his head resting in the child's lap. Every so often, the boy would stroke his fur, and the dog's eyes would flutter closed as if savoring a peace he had long forgotten. Days turned into weeks, and the monster dog became a shadow to the boy, following him from room to room, lying by his bed at night, greeting him at the door every afternoon. The scars remained, but they no longer defined him. In the eyes of the town, he was still the dog from the auction. But in the boy's eyes, he was something far greater. Family. And that was all that mattered.